have Jenna Laib joining us this evening, and we are going to be talking about this question: how can we empower students to become data literate citizens? And I think this is so critical right now.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
If we've
There's
learned
just a little bit of data.
Yeah,
just
a little bit happening.
Pouring out for the last year. So if you are watching, please say hello, hit like, tell people you're watching us, chime in if you would like, ask questions. Jenna's going to do some fun math with us tonight, so you might want to chime in.
Awesome. And if you want our support, we are the Looney Math team, and you can get onto our mailing list. You just text Looney to 22828, and you will have free resources land in your inbox a couple times a month. And we also have a new opportunity hot off the press. So this summer, we are going to be working with teams of teachers, and we are running an institute. It is called Emerging Stronger. And so stay tuned for some more detailed information, but everything is currently up on the website. It is open and there's been lots of interest, and it's a 3-day event for you to work with a team of teachers to talk about unfinished learning and how we greet our students and welcome everyone back with a trauma-informed lens and just celebrate that we're getting a fresh start with a new year. So definitely check that out if you're interested in doing some work in preparing for the task that's ahead of us. So that's exciting to be sharing with all of you today.
Yes.
So I get to introduce our guest, and I'm going to put on my readers. Okay, so Jenna is a math specialist from Brookline Public Schools in Brookline, Massachusetts. And this year, she is teaching 6th grade math in the district's Remote Learning Academy. She started her career as an upper elementary classroom teacher. She's really grateful to have wonderful colleagues at her school and in a larger community to share the pursuit of equitable learning environments. Jenna enjoys collaborating with others to develop content knowledge, pedagogical strategies, and infinite curiosity for mathematical thinking and learning. She has developed and facilitated professional learning at local, state, and national levels. So we are so excited to have her join us here on the Math Together show.
Hi. Hey, welcome. We're so happy that you're here. It's exciting. Well, we always like to start, Jenna, by asking, what is your why? We think that it helps our listeners get to know you a little better, and we always get to find fun tidbit stories that our guests share with us.
So what is my why? So I started in education when I was a teenager, and I used to go volunteer in my youngest brother's classroom. So I was probably 15, 16 years old going in. I got to chaperone field trips. I'm not certain why they let me do that, but I was very invested in going in. And just being a part of this community. And one of the reasons I started actually was because our mother had recently died. And so I wanted to go in and just show support and be a part of that community. And I totally fell in love with it. And I saw that it was this way to connect with people and also to be really creative in the way that you're presenting things. Mm-hmm. So I kind of kept going with that and seeing how you could not just be creative, but also tell lots of stories. And I loved being a storyteller, and I'd been involved in theater. So then ended up majoring in American history. I got a minor in education, went into classroom teaching and really fell in love with teaching, I think all of it, but especially math, because I think that people don't see how creative mathematical teaching can be. And how that can be creative expression for teachers and also creative pursuit for students. So that's
you went from history to math.
I did. I do come from a math family, which I don't usually tell people because I think it gives this impression that, that there's like a math gene or it's our secret now, all of us.
Yes, no one else knows.
Secret. No one knows now. But my father is in math. My brother is a math teacher and a math writer who writes books about math. So it's all, we love it. But that I had chosen American history and American studies because I felt like it again was something that allowed me to integrate stories together so that I was reading literature and I was studying the history and contextualizing everything. I really like when things feel coherent. One of the things I love most about math is when that math story builds and it all feels coherent, you're making the connections, and that just, it feels very continuous for me, even though it sounds strange to jump from history to math.
Awesome.
Not with this group.
No,
it
gives you a really interesting lens, and this lens of storytelling is really powerful. So seeing that through the lens of making connections across content areas and building a creative story with a problem to solve at the end is a really interesting background for you to bring to the table. I really think that's fascinating.
It's fun. That's fun. Good stuff.
So we are going to jump into your key question, and we're really excited, or I guess grateful. I should say grateful. We're going to talk about data. So data sort of gets put aside when we look at our standard. It gets less of an emphasis, and it's turns out that it really would have been useful to have a society of data literate people this year. There's a lot of graphs coming at us. There's a lot of information to wade through with a pandemic, let alone the prior election. So we are thrilled that you're bringing this conversation to light and to be talking about this. I can't think of a more important branch of mathematics at this moment in time. I mean that truly. So given that it gets kind of a back seat, it doesn't take the spotlight, right? You are going to help us think about how we can empower our students so that our students are data literate. So where do we start?
I think the thing that you mentioned here, that it's often kind of relegated. I know when I was a classroom teacher initially, I always taught it in June. That's like when it was in our pacing guide. And so I think the first thing you can do is not wait until June and not have it just sectioned off into like the fun unit that we do when everyone's burned out and ready for summer vacation. That it's really important. So I think the first thing you can do is think about, first of all, like what do you want students to learn? And also, what are some interesting graphs you could use to look at that? Because I think a lot of times in elementary classrooms, I see a lot of like, what's your favorite ice cream flavor? What's your favorite color? And that those are all viewed as very fun and they're personal to the kids, but that it doesn't really pull you into a larger conversation about like how that data was collected, how it's represented, and how we can then act on it. Like I've never seen like what's your favorite ice cream flavor graph and felt like they needed to take action as soon as possible.
Right. I must change their chocolate to vanilla.
And there's purposes for taking that. If I were throwing, I guess, an ice cream party, that would be relevant data. But even then, it's not particularly interesting data to dig into. Whereas our world is so full of things that we can use to help us make decisions and also to think critically about how we are collecting that data. Something I think that's often addressed.
Yeah, I wonder if, because it does sometimes get relegated to the end of the year, if we're lucky, and we leave out that like critical reading piece of it that takes time to build. That's not something that happens just in a couple of weeks. And so when we don't do that, we are often we can be easily misled if we don't know how to really look at the data and how it's presented and question why it was presented in the way that it was, and be able to critique that. And I wonder if that's how we're framing data literate citizens.
Yeah, I think it takes a lot of experience to build up the lens that we look at graphs with. Like, what are the features that we're attending to? What do we notice about the x-axis? What do we notice about the y-axis? What do we notice about the ways that things may or may not be interpreted? You can change the representation a little bit and get a totally different story out of it. And that we need to be really critical with the way that we're looking at it. So I think when I was initially teaching data, I would just show a graph and ask a lot of questions. Or on the days that I was feeling like much better about it, the kids would collect data and then we would represent it and ask questions. And so I think I've developed since then. And I discovered this routine actually. So this routine is called Slow Reveal Graphs, and I came across it through Brian Bushart on Twitter. So his Twitter handle is bstockus. And it's this way of helping students attend to each feature kind of individually to figure out the story of the graph. And then after doing that many times repeatedly within classrooms, the kids catch on to the routine very quickly, that like one part will appear and then another part will appear, and you kind of shift your focus and learn more and more about the data. And that kids were getting much better at independently attending to these details.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I feel like there wasn't a lot of opportunity, or I'm saying wasn't because I'm assuming that most of the time teachers use their programs for the graphs that they're using and whatever. And oftentimes those graphs aren't as super interesting to kids. But also there's just a lot of questions. like you were saying.
Yeah, I know. And they tend to be, it's about the graph. So like a lot of the graphs will be like the length of butterfly wings, which is a great graph, don't get me wrong, but it's not something that you stick with it. Like the whole point of it is to be able to get the features and be able to answer the questions about that. And not that you're going to have this lasting impression about the length of different butterfly wings.
Well, I think, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say, I think what has come up lately is this opportunity, or I shouldn't even say lately, there's an opportunity to think about math for social justice when we look at data. And a story was told in an NCTM session that I was in recently, where we were asked to look at data that was presented about the trend of COVID cases. And it was a lovely line of bar graphs that were all trending down. And based on that, this was, I believe, well, it was out of Georgia, and I believe it was the city of Atlanta, and it was the data they used to reopen the schools. And when you looked closely, they said, well, we just said, what do you notice? What do you wonder? So you're going to walk us through Slow Reveal in a moment, but even just asking that question, what do you notice? Do you remember, did you see the session, Jenna? Do you remember what was wrong with the bar graphs?
I'd seen the session. I think I'd maybe seen it even just popping up on Twitter.
Okay, so they were
was out of not chronological order.
Correct. Correct. So it had spanned, and they said, look, they've declined for the last 14 days, so we're going to open schools. But the bars were descending, but the dates were not chronological. So they simply took, like, maybe it was April 15th, and then it went to May 6th, and then April 18th, whatever. So yes, your bars were going down. So it was an entirely misleading. And I'm going to be honest. I was like, oh, I noticed that it's trending down. Like until somebody else in the meeting with me said, I noticed that the dates are out of order. And of course, the city or whoever had issued that data, and my apologies if I'm getting something wrong about the detail, they issued an apology, and then they reissued the data correctly, and it was all over the place. So we need to be able to critically look at that information, and we can take examples of social justice issues when we can pay attention critically to what's happening. But anyhow, you were going to walk us through an example of a slow reveal. So I think that would be really great.
And I will say that first thing that you had paid attention to, the shape, I think is really critical to get kids just used to the idea that the shape of a graph, whether it's a bar graph or a line graph or scatter plot, whatever they're looking at, that shape can invoke meaning too.
Okay.
So we will start with that. And I'm actually going to do, I think, a different one than I told you we were going to do.
So now we're all going to be real students.
That's right.
All right, I'm trying to figure out exactly how to share the screen. I can do this. I'm on Zoom all day.
Yeah. So if you hit.
How's that? Ooh,
it is.
There we go.
It's perfect.
There we go. All right. So usually when I'm doing this with students, I'm annotating all over the place. If I'm presenting in the classroom, we project on a whiteboard and I write all over it. When I do it on Zoom, I usually have an iPad and I'm drawing all over things. We're just going to talk through it, I think, for right now.
Okay.
So let's take a look. What do you notice? And what do you wonder about this one?
So depending on which way I
Right.
look at it, like the longest bar is on the top and the shortest bar is on the bottom.
And then for the most part, they do get shorter from top to bottom, with only one exception potentially.
Where's the exception?
I mean, those two, the second two from the bottom look
like
kind
they're
of
about
equal.
Yeah. And then maybe a little up from that, like 4 or 5 up from that too.
Yeah.
Those are pretty close.
Right.
But there's a big,
You were probably about to say the same thing, I think. The top bars seems to be a big jump from whatever's happening below it. There seems to be a pretty big, in this case, drop off.
And potentially, I mean, also compared to the very smallest on the bottom, huge difference.
Well, and are we reading from bottom to top or top to bottom?
I kind of want to do this.
Yeah. Right. So we're either growing or decreasing. It could be.
Yeah.
It could be either.
We are so used to seeing bar graphs coming up from the x-axis, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes a horizontal bar graph will throw people. So it sounds like you were saying that you noticed it looked like it was decreasing from going from top to bottom, or increasing going from bottom to top. That there were some that looked like there were similar lengths, but then some seemed very different from the ones around them, particularly that top bar. All right, should we learn some more information?
Yeah, let's.
Sure.
All right. What new information did we just learn?
This data is representing places.
How does that change your thinking about this?
So now it makes me think it's something about population.
No.
Not with India at the bottom.
Yeah.
Oh, good point.
And China is like in the middle. And it's China and Canada are similar-ish. And Spain, no. Because, I mean, China's most populous or pretty close.
Yeah.
So
the ones you noticed before that looked about the same were Denmark and Sweden, which of course are both like Scandinavian countries. So those you might choose to lump together. But then we have Spain and China and Canada that look very comparable in value.
So I'm wondering what the connection between, so like we would normally not see Rwanda and the US that close in many things. So I'm trying to figure out what that would be. And then, I mean, well, no, I was going to say originally, like Russia, Brazil, those were pretty, for a while back, quickly growing, but so is India. So then that takes it off economy-wise.
I can't not think that maybe this is related to COVID, but I have to tell you, I have not been paying attention to what other countries are doing at the moment. I feel like a year ago, we knew everything that all the countries were doing, and now we're just focused on what's happening at home, or at least I am.
Yeah, occasionally I see like more vaccination rates, but I wouldn't necessarily expect the United States to be that far ahead and then followed by Rwanda.
No.
Right.
I noticed that these are also mostly Western countries, but not exclusively.
Right.
We have one African nation. We have 2 Asian, 3, or Russia. Depends on if you count it as European or Asian or both.
Yep. Well, and similar, so I mean, like Denmark, Sweden, Scandinavia-ish. But, you know,
would you like to learn some more information?
Yeah.
Yes, please.
That would be helpful.
Here. I don't know if that's the information you were hoping for.
No.
It just popped up.
Right,
so what new information did we just learn?
Okay.
Well, India, whatever it is, India has 33, and then Sweden and Denmark probably have around 66 or so.
How'd you come up with that number?
Well, that India bar looks like it's it's probably a little bit more than half of Sweden and or what Sweden and Denmark used to look to be.
This is usually where students like come running up because they want to measure it with like their hands.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think for Denmark and Sweden, like 66 seems like a pretty good estimate. Do you have any other ones you'd want to estimate from there?
Well,
I want to do the United States, but it's too hard.
What makes that one so much harder?
It's just so much bigger than that. Like if I could maybe get Brazil, then I could double that to do the United States, I think. So maybe I could do Brazil.
Yeah, iterating that would be a challenge.
Yeah, iterating it without any sort of tool to help us would be very difficult. But you have some great proportional reasoning going, right? That you're thinking about the relationships between these bars really closely. All right, let's get some more information.
Yeah, let's do it.
How do you feel about your
Molly,
guesses?
so you're pretty close.
Yeah. All right, here's a little bit more.
Yeah.
Okay. So we look.
Maybe is it how many languages there are in that country? You think we?
Well, India would be a lot higher.
Oh, because of all the different dialects.
Yeah. I mean, there's 2 national languages and then all the regional.
Okay.
I mean, I'm just wondering, like, is this in thousands, millions, right? When I see 33, I'm just wondering, or is it literally there's only, like, it really, are we measuring only 33 of those in the entire country of India? I'm thinking that there must be an adjective, something that comes after that describes the magnitude of that number, but I could be wrong.
But isn't that hard? Doesn't that happen only? Oh, I guess if your scale was on the top or the bottom, right?
Yeah, I would probably expect to have seen something there, like a K or an M for 1,000 or million, but that you're attending to exactly the right things of like, what is the magnitude of this, particularly when we're dealing with these enormous countries.
Right.
Any other thinking, or do you want to see the next one?
Let's keep going.
I'm not super data literate.
All right, so now you can actually see where this graph is coming from.
Wow.
So the source for this graph, the slow reveal was actually designed by an amazing educator named Connie Rivera, and she found this graph on the website, The Sentencing Project. So what do you think this might be about now?
Well, I think we're going into math for social justice here.
I'm guessing minor drug offenses.
Guessing
but
incarcerations.
Unjust situations over yeah.
And how does that make you think or feel now that you're thinking something so different from what you were maybe thinking before about these values? Like, oh, the United States is the biggest one. And now that we're seeing the
winners and something bad.
Mm-hmm. Well, which has kind of been our theme for the last years or 4. So
I was thinking.
So if we consider that, like,
yeah.
So,
all right. Would you like to see the next one?
Not really.
Yeah. All right. You're curious, but maybe not excited.
Yeah. And so
what you just learn now that the title's been revealed?
Rates of incarceration per 100,000.
So if I were doing this with students, I'd want to help them conceptualize what that ratio means. What does it mean to have 670 people out of 100,000? The town where I teach is about 80,000. So like thinking about that many people, which is like the size of one school, basically, within the town where I teach.
Yes. Yeah. Having a benchmark.
So like the 670 for the United States, the school where I teach typically has about 650 to 670 kids. And within a town that's about that size. But then thinking about India, like 33, that's just one class compared with one school.
And I mean, like, I think that is so striking, right? So when we put it from this level of data to the personal level of data, that we might be able to understand the difference between that, the difference between a class, the difference between a school, and what that represents. And then so I'll bring this up to, so like the US is a democratic, more or less represented, country that, in comparison to two places, Rwanda more so since the conflict there in the 90s, but like Russia, Brazil, not necessarily seen as non-authoritarian, like they're authoritarian regimes often. I mean, that's how we kind of look at them. So when you compare that to what we have here in the US, so like India is another, or was, I mean, like there's plenty of struggle there now, a democracy. When we look at that difference, and like even China is a communist country. So when we compare ourselves as a country to other systems of government and how we compare, I would be really interested to see what the ratio of Black and Brown is even within that percentage. Like, what is that?
And what Connie, who again created this particular slide deck, the slow reveal, she actually then did it for 4 graphs in sequence, and that it then shows the racial disparities. And they're also, and I trust the Sentencing Project to do their data. I looked a little bit at the site, but I also know that some of these may be self-reported by countries. And so I wonder also about things like the Uyghur population in China is not necessarily considered incarcerated, but there's all sorts of like human rights crisis going on. But no matter how you look at this, the United States looks really bad with how we are treating our communities. And
I think the big question that arises is why, right? Why do we have so many more incarcerations than all these other? So it leads to further investigation then, which hopefully leads to action.
Yeah, I feel that, like, Jenna, all of the graphs that I've seen, and I've been on your website plenty of times and seen you do a few of them. I feel like I don't typically have a lot of feelings about data when I look at data just in the real world. Well, that's not true. In the last year, I've had a lot of feelings, so scratch that. In school, what I have been exposed to in school, I don't feel like I have like a lot of feelings. Like you were talking about the ice cream situation, that doesn't evoke a lot of emotion for me. But all of the ones that I have seen you do or seen on your website do evoke emotion. So as you're going through it and you are invested in it, in the end, you feel like you were saying before, like, oh, I need to go do something about that, or I need to investigate this more. I have more questions or whatever. And that is a totally different feeling for me in terms of data in school.
And I think with this power also comes great responsibility, that students will have feelings about this, but that their feelings may all be pretty different depending on their relationship to the content, and that we need to be prepared for that. And that you need to know your students and also know how to deal with some difficult conversations that will come up. Even one that I didn't think would be quite as like polemic as this one. We were doing one that was about housing vouchers for veterans. This was around Veterans Day, but it involved like looking at homelessness rates amongst veterans. And a lot of the kids in my classes, like they didn't know anyone who's a veteran. And so they viewed it as very sad, and they were really upset that like all these people that had contributed and sacrificed for the country were then struggling with this issue, and that we have a responsibility to help them. But for the couple kids who maybe like a parent had been in the Army or like they had other relatives, it was a very different personal issue for them. And I think some of them were kind of put off by the way that everyone else was treating it so sterile, because they didn't have those same experiences. And so these conversations are really difficult, but really important. And I know that one girl in my classroom like doesn't talk very often. She'll type in the chat, but she very rarely unmutes. She unmuted to talk about how her father had been in the army, and like he's not homeless, but that there's all sorts of challenges when you return back to civilian life. It's particularly sad that they would have this challenge.
Yeah.
Yikes.
Well, this was a great example of how this routine works and how you were talking about it. It helps us pay attention to the features. So we move from how do you label, like how do you make a graph, into really the real purpose of graph is to tell a story, which is where this interview started with your history background. And you said you talked about storytelling and the creativity. So we have an opportunity to tell a story of what's going on and to spur people to action or to empathy in the story that you just shared. So we can walk beside you and hear your story. So I think it's a phenomenal routine. And I'm thrilled that we can point people in the direction of sharing some of those resources.
And what I love about it is it's not intimidating to make one of these. Although if you go to slowrevealgraphs.com, you can find some that are already made. You can submit one there yourself if you'd like, but you can practice by using somebody else's creativity. And but they're not hard to make. I mean, right? I don't think so.
I mean, I've gotten used to it. So I've learned not to be like, it's so easy when it's like easy for me. But that basically I use the white rectangle technique that I learned from Dan Meyer, which is like I grab different features from the graph that I want to reveal later and then copy a bunch of slides. You can actually like on that slide, you could probably see at the very beginning, sorry that it looked like it was almost still sharing. You can see that they all look very, very similar on the side. And that's because it's like a bunch of slides that all have like one little tiny rectangle removed.
Right.
Excellent. Yeah. And there's a range of grade levels on there too, because I was looking at some examples today too. So that's the place to start. If this is a new routine, is go with the ones that are created and then kind of mimic. And then that's a great little tip. The white, what did you call it? The white rectangle trick.
Certainly like the first one that I ever made was actually about the Electoral College. And then after that, I made a bunch of ones about animals because I think that like those are just very instantly engaging. Kids get really invested in them. It doesn't necessarily propel you to action, but it's kind of like, I learned a fun fact, and they would get all excited about it. So they were like easy entry points, and they didn't. So kids really liked those. And so I wouldn't necessarily show this one about incarceration rates to like a 4th grade class.
Right.
Very heavy for them, but.
Yeah.
Right.
But having that conversation with older students, and also crossing contents, I think too. So using this in that history classroom, and then, when we're looking at nonfiction writing or reading within a literacy classroom, applying those same techniques to reading graphs, I think is really critical and important, and being able to have an open conversation about the data that is revealed and why it's represented the way that it is, I think and giving kids the space to ask those questions and to look at that, I think is really so much of our job within our roles in education.
Well, I like the cross-curricular piece to it because you can steal some math time from another subject. I don't think you should do that, but you can.
But I think it's a good launch for them too. Like I think that there are some that I've done in collaboration with science teachers, or I went into an 8th grade class last year right before we all shut down to talk about vaping. And it was a really complicated graph for them. Actually, it was one of those ones that's like both a line graph and a bar graph. It's like superimposed. There's 2 different y-axes they have to attend to. So they were kind of like, what even is this? But they got so invested by the time they found out it was about vaping and about dollars spent on advertising and vaping. They were just kind of shocked about like how the correlation between the amount of dollars spent on marketing for vaping, or rather correlated strongly to the number of teenagers who were then vaping.
Mm-hmm.
And they were like, but we don't see any ads. There are no ads for vaping. And when I explained like where they might actually see them, they're like, oh yeah, yes, that is a real thing.
Yeah. Interesting. Wow. So then how can we learn more from you, Jenna? How can our listeners learn more from you?
So if you want to learn more about slow reveal graphs, I'd go to the website. And on the website, I also included sections. Actually, do you want me to just show it quickly?
Sure.
If I can screen share again.
That would be, yeah, super fun.
Let's see. I can do this. I'm on Zoom all day. There we go.
Right.
So on the website, you can navigate it by category of graph. So like if you really know you want to do a scatter plot, there are some scatter plots. Or there are also different tags. Not all of the tags show up because these are just the most popular. So you could also search here. But if you really wanted to know more about the routine and not just practice one, I would go to the read about it or the workshops and conferences. So people have been blogging about their different experiences. You can see different blog posts. This is the earliest one. I think this is where I first learned about it, reading on Brian's blog. Awesome. And you can also see workshops and conferences. So I facilitate it in certain ways, and then you can also view like other people who have done it, and they'll have slightly different facilitation styles, which I love seeing. I think it's really nice to just see how different interpret routine.
Yes, great.
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, so that's where you could learn more. And then I've also written about it on my blog. But my blog is not just about data and slow reveals. I tend to write a lot more about like student interviews, whatever I'm thinking about with my practice.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And I think that's, where I initially started reading and was your blog. And it's that idea of having a critical lens of our own practice that you're making available out there for everyone. I think that's such an amazing gift to new educators and to those of us who are, thinking about and always trying to analyze, where do I get other perspectives on a particular idea? And I think that space is really great for that as well.
Awesome.
Thank you. I'm always so honored when I hear anyone's writing it because I write it for me. It's like my work process and like a creative outlet for me. But
I definitely think so.
Well, if anybody wants to get in touch with Jenna, you can certainly find her on Twitter. And we are so thrilled that you are here and got to share slow reveal graphs with us. And I love watching. I've seen you do them a couple of times, and it was fun to participate in one tonight. So excellent. Yeah.
Thank you so much for taking some time out for us. And, please be safe, be well, and keep doing what you're doing.
Right.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you.
All right, Jenna, thanks. All right.
Excellent.
Yeah, that was fun. 2 weeks in a row we got to do math, right?
I know.
We did. So definitely check out those resources. Those are ready to go and use in classrooms. So critical. Just a reminder, hot off the press, there'll be more to come about our Summer Institute. There's 2 sessions, one in June, one in August, to accommodate. We know that some people actually are already making those kinds of decisions, but we'll be talking about this for a while. So you can see that information on the website. You can also hop on our mailing list and we'll be talking about it there. So that's who we are, and we're here to support you. We we see you. Teachers in Massachusetts, we know you've got a lot of changes coming at you. So know that we appreciate you, and we know how hard you're working, and everyone, not just Massachusetts. It's just that Monday's a big day for Massachusetts educators in many towns, bringing kids back.
Yes. And next week, we are super excited on April 7th to have Brad Johnson with us. He is going to be talking about his book called Dear Teacher. And I have been reading it, and I think people are going to really enjoy reading it and hearing from him. So please tune in next week. So thanks everybody for joining us tonight. And remember to always be curious.
Night, everyone.
Take good care.